Hi everyone, my name's Jacob, and in this video we'll be taking a look at the various ant species that I own. Ants have colonised nearly every landmass, with the few exceptions being Antarctica, Greenland, Iceland, and a few other inhospitable island nations. Due to their highly adaptable and resilient nature, they're some of the most widespread animals, with science conservatively estimating there to be upwards of 20 quadrillion individuals in the world. That's a staggering 2.5 million ants per person, or a 20 followed by 15 zeros. There are more than 15,700 named species, with many more still being discovered. Personally, I, out of this rather larger number, own a humble 9, although I hope this number continues to grow in the future. Alright, first up we have a rather common species to the UK, as well as most of Europe, Myrmica rubra, also known as the European fire ant. So called for their bright red colour and painful sting. From first-hand experience, I can say that they're very aggressive and won't hesitate to use their stinger. I've had this particular colony for the last year, and in that time they've seen their fair share of nests. They used to be housed in a white-tongued Formicarium, and before this, I had them in a tubs and tubes setup. Currently, they're housed in a large naturalistic fish bowl. It's ideal for them as this species loves high humidity, and I found if conditions are too dry, then the queens will cease laying eggs and colony growth will slow down drastically. They also love their heat, and so I have them placed on a stand where in the day they get full sunlight. Although this probably isn't necessary, as my room gets quite warm, staying at a temperature around 24 degrees Celsius. That's around 75 Fahrenheit for you imperial users. This species also has the cool trait of being polygynous, meaning that a colony can actually have multiple queens. A little known fact about Myrmica rubra is that they actually have two kinds of queen. One which is fairly easily identifiable, being larger than the workers. And the other is the same size as them, but slightly darker in colour. I think this colony has a few, although it's very difficult to confirm this for certain, especially now that I can't observe the inner workings of the colony. Due to their multiple queens, they always have plenty of brood, meaning that they need large amounts of protein for proper development. This is very easily observed in their feeding behaviour, with many workers swarming any pre-killed food items that I offer to them. Owing to this high protein intake, they have a very fast colony growth, which in the wild means that they're quite invasive. But not to the level of their close cousins, ants from the genus Solenopsis, spreading to parts of America and Asia, displacing local species. Unfortunately for me, the queens are quite short-lived, reaching around 2 years, which in terms of ant queen lifespan is quite low, with some reaching up to 30 years. So unless I manage to introduce new queens this summer, they'll probably die off. Although information on this subject varies greatly, with some reports saying that they can also live to 30. We'll just have to wait and see. Fingers crossed that they'll stay with us for years to come. The next colony is probably from my favourite genus, aside from leafcutters. They're weaver ants from the genus Polyrhachis. Specifically, they're Polyrhachis dives, and are commonly known as false or lesser weaver ants due to their nesting habits. True weaver ants are from the genus Eucophila and weave nests from leaves exclusively, whereas lesser weavers use anything and everything. I've seen them use moss, small twigs, cocoa fibre and even coarse sand before. Now you may be wondering what I mean by them being able to weave. Simply put, they use their larva's silk to glue together different materials. Many ant species larvae spin silk to make cocoons to protect them as they make the final transition to becoming a worker ant. Weaver ants have taken this one step further, and workers will hold the larvae in their mandibles and stroke them with their antennae, encouraging them to produce this silk, which the workers will use to weave together various materials to construct nests. In these scenarios, it's easy to visualise the workers using the larvae like glue bottles. One of the first things that stands out about them is their bold coloration. Their matte black bodies and golden abdomen give them quite a striking appearance. Combine this with 2 large spikes on their petiole and another 2 on their thorax, and they look ready to fight at a moment's notice. Despite all the spikes, they actually lack a stinger and instead have an acidopore. It's a pore in the end of their abdomens from which they can spray and secrete formic acid. So when they're disturbed, they bend their gaster forwards and posture up towards any intruders, almost like their abdomens are pistols. As you can see, they're currently housed in a natural setup, which I planned to be their forever home, but I recently came into possession of an 8cm tank, which I plan to rehouse them into the near future. In the wild, colonies average 2,000 to 3,000 workers per queen and can have a massive 50 queens. If I had to estimate, I'd say this colony is nearing 100 workers, or around about that range, and I can confidently say that there's only 1 queen. It's not a massive colony, but they're well on the way to becoming a force to be reckoned with. I found they enjoy smaller, more manageable prey that they can carry into the nest, although they'll readily accept anything I offer them. They absolutely love their sugars, and I'll often see workers drinking from their sugar water test tube. I think giving them smaller prey items is best, as it encourages their natural foraging behaviour, forcing them to carry carcasses up the wood and sometimes even down into the nest. It's incredible to think how strong they are, being able to carry objects several times their own weight. Sometimes when I look over, I'll even see workers carrying out remains from the nest and taking them to the other side of the tank. I suspect this is to prevent mould from overtaking the nest. Or it could also be able to stop larger animals who may snack on the ants from being able to find the colony as easily. Next up, we have a founding ant queen. I'm not 100% certain what species she is, but if I had to guess, I'd say she's from the genus Lesfm. Currently, she's housed in quite a dirty test tube, although unfortunately I don't think she'll ever move past this stage, as I suspect she's infertile. Looking at her brood, she's had this clutch developing for over a year, and the growth is so slow, which is quite unusual for an ant of this size. Also looking at her brood, she has a single pupa. Judging from its size and shape, it looks to be male elate. Whilst fertile queens lay eggs, they hatch into female workers who forage and help the colony grow. Infertile queens' eggs hatch into males who don't. They'll sit around and wait for a nuptial flight, and with no workers, the queen will unfortunately pass away. I'm planning on releasing her once her first pupa ecloses, when it goes from a pupa to the ant we all know. It's quite sad, but all part of the natural process. I'll continue to care for her until that day, so let's leave her to enjoy her final days. Next up is quite a fast growing species, Tetramorium bicarinatum. They don't have a common name that I'm aware of, however other ants from the same genus are sometimes referred to as pavement ants. Currently, I have them housed in a nest that I designed and 3D printed. It has 2 exit ports, one for a small outworld and the other for a water or sugar water test tube. Their outworld is quite simple, with only gravel, twigs and a little bit of moss. I made this myself using a small food container, as well as a drill and some 3D printed parts. Looking back, I probably should have added another port to the outworld for easier expansion, but more on that soon. At a glance, this species seems quite bland, with no sting, fairly small size and undistracting coloration. However, they have one trait which allows them to form massive colonies from just a single queen. They can inbreed with no undesirable effects. The exact details of how they can do this is still not fully understood, but the current theory is that queen elates clones of the queen with only her DNA, whereas the males are somehow clones of the father, thus making the queen and male elates genetically different to each other, so allowing them to inbreed with no adverse effects. This allows them to grow quickly into massive super colonies, with hundreds if not thousands of queens. Let's bring the focus back to these girls here though. Currently, they're not quite at super colony proportions, and have 2 queens, and probably between 100 and 200 workers. I've not counted, so this is just a loose guess. They also have a lot of brood. I've noticed that they like to pile up their brood on the open areas, organised by age. Seeing as they're about to explode in population, I think they're due for an expansion. I 3D printed this nest, so let's make it suitable for a thriving colony of ants. I began by adding cotton wool to the pockets to provide and create a humidity gradient, which is vital for brood development. I fitted a small acrylic cover so that I can easily observe the colony. It has holes drilled into it, so I can also easily hydrate the wool. To make the nest a desirable place to occupy, I did just this, injecting a small amount of water into each pocket. I connected the new nest to the other using vinyl tubing and plugged the second entrance with cotton wool. Seeing as this is an expansion and not a rehouse, I don't need to persuade the ants to change a nest, so they'll hopefully use one of them as a satellite nest. They might even keep a queen in each, to not put all their eggs in one basket, so to speak. Let's celebrate this new space by offering them a pre-killed roach. They exhibit some awesome swarming behaviours, and I've found that they prefer to rip pieces off the carcass and carry it back to the nest, rather than consume it on the spot. This allows them to be more efficient and bring home more food in one trip. Judging from the colony's size, I'll need to connect a larger outworld soon, but I'll save that for a later date. Next up is quite a large ant species, Camponotus ligniperda. Now the first thing that stands out is this species' impressive size, with the queen measuring nearly 20mm. Just look at her compared to the unknown queen we looked at earlier. This species is the largest in Europe, closely followed by their cousins, Camponotus herculeanus. Currently the queen has no workers, as they take quite a while to establish, with the process from egg to ant taking up to 3 months. However, once established, these colonies can be very powerful, easily splitting enemy ants in half with their large mandibles. In the wild, they use these mandibles to carve out galleries and tunnels in rotting wood, and use their sheer strength to transport these materials out of the nest. As with most ants from the genus Camponotus, they're actually polymorphic, meaning individuals from the colony can look wildly different. They can have majors, reaching up to 12 millimeters, with large jaw muscles used for defense and construction. The typical media workers are present as in all ant colonies, foraging and doing daily tasks. Finally, colonies also have a minor caste, rarely seen foraging, instead acting like nurses, tending to the queen and brood. Currently though, none of these castes are present, and I don't expect any of them for a while. Patience is a virtue with large ants such as these. In ants, perhaps predictably, large size equates to slow development and often smaller colony sizes, whereas small ants develop much quicker, can quickly grow into thousands of workers strong, but much more fragile than their larger, more powerful cousins. Next up is perhaps my most interesting looking ant species, Odonteponera transversa, or, as they're more commonly known, Tetramorium ants. They get the toothed part of their name from their large, tooth-like mandibles, and they're ponerine ants for the simple reason that they're from the genus Polyrhachis. Originally, I had them temporarily housed in this white-tongue nest, but in the wild, these ants nest in warm, humid tropical forests, so this setup wasn't ideal for them. I moved them into this cylindrical nest that I designed myself. I'm quite proud of it, as it was the first complicated ant nest that I'd designed, although looking back, I'd make a few changes, such as having a better lid locking mechanism. Fortunately, this isn't too important with these ants, as they have a funny quirk of not being able to climb smooth surfaces, giving me the opportunity in the future to come up with some really creative nest designs. This colony is still small, with only 2 workers and a queen, although I suspect they have some larvae below ground. As they're a mid-sized ant, they don't have the fastest development rate, and colonies grow slowly. Another thing I heard about this species is that they can actually follow each other's footsteps with remarkable accuracy, although my colonies are much too small to observe this behaviour. I'm not sure why they'd actually do this though, as I can't imagine ants want to hide their footprints, as they don't really have footprints, so if anyone has any ideas, then please let me know. Next up we have Formica fusca, also known as the wood ant. They get this name from their nesting habits, as they're usually found in and under dead or rotting wood. Quite the opposite of what I have them housed in. Usually, I wouldn't try something like this. However, in my area I see them nesting in stony areas, where in summer there's lots of heat and the soil is nearly completely dry, hence their outback themed desert home. Previously, I've had them in a temporary white-tongue all-in-one nest, but this was only ever a temporary solution, as fusca queens are very sensitive and will eat their eggs and stop laying at the slightest disturbance, so a more natural setup is much more suitable for them. Here they've excavated a nest under the sand, so it's quite difficult to observe them. Despite this, when I first introduced them, I managed to count a staggering 16 queens. Colonies of this species can have hundreds of queens, but are also susceptible to slave maker ants. They overwhelm fusca nests, stealing vast amounts of brood and pupa, greatly reducing the colony numbers in these areas. Fortunately for these girls, there's no risk of being robbed of their precious brood here, and hopefully the colony grows and flourishes. These ants tend to be more active at night, making them nocturnal, so let's come back later in the evening to get a better glimpse into the lives of this elusive species. Perhaps as their nightly nature suggests, they're quite a skittish species and flee at the slightest disturbance. They tend to forage singly and don't exhibit much swarming behaviour like other species do. They seem to nest around the plants. I'm not sure quite why they do this. Perhaps the roots provide some structural integrity to their tunnels. or maybe the plants retain humidity, which the ants enjoy. I'm not too sure how much longer I'll be keeping this colony, as I rarely see them and don't find them particularly interesting. Fortunately, they're a native species, so if the time comes, I'll simply re-release them to where they were collected. Next up we have a somewhat common species in the hobby. Nevertheless, it's still an interesting one. Messor barbarus, or as it's more commonly known, the European harvester ant. They're a somewhat large species, coming around 17mm with the queen, and workers measuring between 3 and 14mm. Quite the size difference. Currently, the queen is on her first generation of workers, known as nanitics. They're smaller than the normal worker, but are perfect for getting a colony started, as they require less resources to be raised. Now they're currently housed in a vertical ant nest. Although it looks quite nice, I've found that these ants are quite clumsy and struggle climbing up vertical surfaces, so I'll be rehousing them into something more suitable shortly. At this point, you may be wondering why they're called harvester ants, and it's for one special reason. Seeds make up to 70% of their diet. They form long trails carrying seeds back to their nests, where they can be stored for long periods of time. When a seed is consumed, workers will chew them into a sort of ant bread which can be fed to the larvae of the colony. They get their name from this, as it's almost as if they're harvesting their food. Currently, there's just under 10 workers with plenty of pupa. This nest just isn't cutting it for them, so let's change it up. I'll begin by creating an outworld. I'm using a clear food container. I drilled a hole to attach the nest, then mixed up some plaster of Paris with aquarium sand to achieve a consistency that of cement. I added the mix in and levelled it out by lightly shaking the container. A printed plug was added to connect the tube without risk of the acrylic cracking. Now for the nest. I printed it out and set it up in the same way as the Tetramorium nest. I connected it directly to their current nest. To encourage them to move out, I shone a bright light onto their nest and kept the new one covered. As ants are naturally photophobic, they'll move away from the light. I left it like this for a few hours, and when I came back they were all gone, so I could disconnect the old one. Even though these ants aren't particularly good escape artists, I'll still apply a layer of fluon around the lid, just to prevent any chance of them crawling through the ventilation holes. I designed this nest with their needs in mind. First off is the red cover. These ants are really sensitive to light, which can cause them a lot of stress. Supposedly, ants cannot see red light, so this maintains a nice dark area, even when I'm checking up on them. Also, this nest only has one hydration chamber. As I explained earlier, harvester ants actually store seeds for later consumption. However, to prevent them from sprouting in the nest, they keep them in the drier areas. By having one hydration chamber, it creates a good moisture gradient in which the ants can choose where to keep their brood and seeds. It's time to finish up their setup. I connected the outworld to the nest using some vinyl tubing. To encourage them to explore, I sprinkled some seeds which I'm sure they'll collect in no time. I also added a water test tube to the nest. I often don't show it, but all my ants have a water supply present at all times. And look at that, already ants have started collecting the seeds. These guys are well on their way to booming in population, and I can't wait to see it. The final ant species I own is the infamous and highly controversial Solenopsis geminata. Before going into details on this colony, I think it's important to quickly discuss the responsibility of an ant keeper, especially when keeping highly invasive species such as these. My personal view on exotic ants is that it should be kept only if the owner is fully prepared to deal with any potential problems and is responsible with the colony. Fortunately, tropical fire ants struggle to get a hold here in the UK, as the weather is unfavourable for them, especially the cold winters. With that all said, let's lighten the mood a bit and get into the colony. As I mentioned, these ants are Solenopsis geminata, but more commonly known as tropical fire ants due to their fiery sting and tropical origin. Currently, they're housed in a 3D printed nest with their needs in consideration. It has 4 entrance points so that I can easily expand the nest in the future, which is vital with their quick growth rate, as well as a hole on one side that a heat cable can be passed through to create a temperature gradient. Most importantly, the floor has some very small holes to allow humidity to enter the nest from the hydration chamber below. They've grown quite quickly, and the majors have just recently begun to arrive. The size difference between the workers is quite extreme, especially with the super majors. One thing I didn't expect when I purchased this colony is the sheer amount of brood that they would have. It's piled up from floor to ceiling, and it vastly outnumbers the amount of workers. This large amount of brood comes at a price for the colony. They require a lot of feeding. This ant species is known for their foraging habits, as they form impressive trails. Although not quite to the extent of marauder and army ants, they are still a force to be reckoned with, and this small ant colony already swarms their food items. These ants form impressive rafts when their nests flood, and I'd like to be able to observe this behaviour, so in the future I may move them into a more natural setup. However, I do also quite like being able to observe the inner workings of the colony, so I'll have to make my mind up, but this project will be in the distant future, as the colony still needs to grow a bit bigger, and it will be quite a large project. That's all the ant colonies that I currently own, but hopefully in the future my collection will continue to grow. Ants are truly incredible creatures, and it's fascinating to watch them go about their daily activities. I hope you enjoyed this video, especially it's a very different format to what I usually do. So please consider liking the video and subscribing. Before I end this video, I want to quickly address something some of you may have noticed. My channel has undergone a bit of a rebrand from indoor exotics to anything ants. I'm not exclusively switching to ant content, and many of my videos won't be about ants. But ants hold a special place in my heart, and the majority of my content is about them, so I felt appropriate to make this switch. With that all said and done, I hope you enjoyed this video, and thank you for staying to the end. I'll see you all next time.